let me share with you a couple of the themes that emerged. Again, I interviewed about 36 other people inside companies, as well as some of the advocates and academics and other experts who work in our space. So one theme, no one gets rewarded for something that doesn't happen. So a lot of the work that we do, and a lot of the work that I did at BP, is preventative. But that's really hard to reward for. So I talked to one woman who manages supply chain for a big multinational, and she was telling me in our interview how livid she was when one of her company's internal awards, which are very prestigious in a big company, went to one of her colleagues who managed a big safety disaster. And she was like, "Are you kidding me? I've prevented like 20 of those." But it's really hard to reward for that. Right? And I interviewed a few people who were brought into their companies after crises. And we all know that the silver lining of crises is that companies see the urgency to change and are willing to throw some energy and some resources behind it. But then, after a couple years, a couple CEOs later, a couple management changes, if you're really good at your job, nothing bad has happened. And people start looking at your budget and your head count and going, what are you doing here? We don't really need you, right? Clearly nothing bad has happened. And you're like, nothing bad has happened because I'm here doing the things that I'm doing. So one other theme that emerged, which is of a slightly different nature, was that very few people bear witness. And so from our cushy corporate offices or cubicles, it can be easy to make decisions, losing sight of the impacts that those decisions have on people and communities at the tippy toes of our supply chain. So a number of the people who I interviewed told me how important it was for them to get out in the field. As one person from the Gap told me, to know what I'm fighting for. He told me this really wrenching story that's in the book of when he went to go visit survivors and their families of one of the factory fires in Bangladesh. And he said, I wanted to say sorry. I wanted to listen to their stories if they wanted to share them with me, and most people did, a few people didn't. But he said, I sit in these policy discussions in headquarters in San Francisco or in Geneva, and they get really abstract, but they get really contentious, and I need to know what I'm fighting for. But also for people to bring their senior leaders together with those stories. So Laura Rubo, who's on the International Labor Standards team at Disney, told me about how her team arranged for Disney's CFO to go visit factories in China where Disney-branded products were made. And they did them like they do every other factory trip, random selection of factories, unannounced audits, and they saw some good factories, and they saw some that were not so nice. And that trip was really key for her team to continue getting senior-level support for their work. And so for me, again, it was really powerful to go out to West Papua for the first time and see this project, because when I joined BP, I understood conceptually what we did, right? We keep the lights on, we keep the cars moving. But it was really when I got out there and thought, oh, this is what we do. Very few people bear witness. Okay, this actually does lead into the next theme really nicely, which came out really strongly, which is the importance of listening and creating ownership. And listening is one of those things that we all know sounds quite basic, but is generally done terribly, if at all. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to go work for John Ruggie in his capacity as UN Special Representative is that he was managing to take, again, this very polarized debate and create ownership amongst all of these different parties that had been really vigorously opposed to each other. And so we would have these multi-stakeholder consultations, which particularly at the beginning were very contentious. And he's one of these guys who, he doesn't say much over the course of the day, even though people are yelling at each other. I mean, really yelling and storming out of the room. And then at the end of the day, he would summarize. And in his summary, he was just so skilled at playing back a little something from everybody, so that people walked out of there feeling like, yeah, he heard me, and I own a piece of that. which made everybody much more likely to support whatever he was doing going forward, even if they didn't agree with all of it. But people feeling like they were heard and they were listened to and creating ownership. And that was actually a big theme from the other folks who I interviewed for my book. So Dave Stangus, who I think some of you know, is a vice president of CSR for Campbell's Soup, and he was at Intel for a long time. He told me, he gave me a nice quote. He said, you know, those of us who have been in the space for a while, we used to think we had to evangelize. And if only we could just get everybody to get sustainability and see the world the way that we do, that's our job. And he said, we realized that just doesn't work anymore. So he told me about when he first got to Campbell's, he was sitting with Doug Conant, who was then the CEO, and Doug was really keen to announce his big, bold sustainability goals, because I think Lee Scott from Walmart had just announced his. And so Dave's in the meeting in the office with Doug, and he says, let's write them down on a napkin now, and I'll go announce them, and then you go tell everybody how to implement them. And Dave was like, please don't do that. You know, they're going to hate me, and it's not going to work. So give me some time to go sit with all the function leaders and the business heads and understand what they're paid to do, what they're measured on, so we can frame how our work supports theirs. So the importance of listening and creating ownership. And of course, it relates to this whole issue of how do you make the case? So for me, I barreled into China saying, okay, we're gonna protect the human rights of workers and communities. Woohoo! And that kind of fell flat. I mean, I didn't get thrown out or anything, but people just looked at me blankly. And then I tried, okay, these are the standards that BP uses around the world, so we're gonna use them here. Thanks very much. No, thank you. And so finally I had to shut up for a while and listen to what resonated with people, what they were worried about, what motivated them. So finally when I came back and said, okay, I understand that you guys want this to be a world-class model project. If that's the case, these are the standards, SA 8000, et cetera, that world-class model projects use, so we're going to use them here. And they're like, oh, okay, why don't you say so? Being flippant, but. So the importance of listening and creating ownership, which relates to this whole issue that we all talk about a lot in this space about making the case.